Welcome to the Malat Cookery channel. So I'm making a lasagna from scratch for the family meal for this evening. I just thought I'd show you guys how I do it. So this lasagna recipe is a real favourite for the family. The spice blend we're going to be using from the Malat range is their Italian seasoning. And if you don't have access to the Malat range of products, then you're going to need a few things, because the Italian seasoning from Malat is what's called an all-in-one spice blend, a restaurant blend, which means it's got quite a few things in components to it in order for the restaurant just to mix it with some passata or with tinned tomatoes to make a ragu sauce. So if you don't have access to the Malat Italian seasoning, you're going to need at least 2 teaspoons of a good quality Italian herb mix, a teaspoon of garlic powder, half a teaspoon of salt and half a teaspoon of pepper, just as a bare minimum. As usual, a full list of ingredients will be given at the end of the video, so let's have a look at those ingredients now and anything else we're going to need for today. So the ingredients for the lasagna I'm going to take in 2 stages. The first one being the meat ragu sauce, which is this, and then following on from this I'll do the white sauce. So for the meat ragu sauce, I'm going to be using about 5 strips of smoked streaky bacon, which I'm going to chop into small pieces. I've got 1 small white onion which has been diced, 10 grams of Malat Italian seasoning, or whichever seasoning you're going to use. I'm going to be using some salt and pepper, 2 400-gram tins of plum tomatoes, 500 grams of ground beef or minced beef, and 500 grams of ground pork or minced pork, 2 sticks of celery which have been washed and chopped into small pieces, 2 medium carrots, again which has been peeled and chopped into small pieces, and 2 tablespoons of tomato puree or tomato paste. And we're also going to need obviously some lasagna sheets. So I'm using dried lasagna sheets. Obviously you can use fresh if you want to. So the ingredients for the white sauce: I've got a litre of semi-skimmed milk, 5 heaped tablespoons of plain flour, a large white onion which has been diced. I'm going to be using some salt and pepper for seasoning, 120 grams of mature cheddar cheese which has been grated, 50 grams of butter. I've got 40 grams of freshly grated Parmesan cheese which I've split into 2, 25 grams will be going into the sauce, and 15 grams will be used to as part of the topping for the lasagna. And I've got a clove of garlic which has been minced, and I'm going to be using a little pinch of nutmeg, which is optional. So for our ragu sauce, I've got a large deep frying pan or casserole pan, and in the casserole pan I've placed 4 tablespoons of olive oil. So over a medium heat, we're just getting that up to temperature. So the first thing we want to do is to add our chopped smoked streaky bacon. And what we're going to do with this bacon now is just render the bacon, get as much flavour from this smoked bacon as possible. So this is going to take about 6 or 7 minutes. This is a really important step in making a decent lasagna. This adds a lot of flavour to the dish. Okay, so once we start to get some colour to the bacon, we then add in our onion. The carrots, down the celery. Just going to turn the heat down just slightly. And then we want to cook this for about 10 minutes. Just until the onions start to soften. Okay, next thing we want to do is add the tomato puree. I'm just going to cook that puree through for about a minute just to take some of the harshness off it. And then goes the Malat Italian seasoning. Okay, now it's time to add our ground pork and beef. Okay, we're just going to take about 7 or 8 minutes now just to cook this meat in and mix it in with the vegetables. So we just want to get this to a stage where the mince or the ground beef and pork is browned all over. Next thing to do is to add our 2 tins of plum tomatoes. And we also need to add 2 tins of water. It's a good opportunity to wash the tins out, get as much the plum tomato juice into the dish as possible. Just mix that in. Give the dish a good seasoning. Some salt and pepper. Next thing I'm going to do is turn the heat right down and just let this gently simmer for about an hour and a half. That will get all those flavours concentrated together, reduce the liquid in the sauce so we get a nice, thick, rich meat ragu sauce for our lasagna. So after an hour and a half, this is what we've got. Now it did start to go a bit dry, this ragu, so I have added about 150 ml of water. Obviously you've got the flexibility to do that if you need to. The tomatoes have broke down really nice, produces really delicious sauce. So that's it for the meat ragu. The next thing to do is obviously the white sauce. So to make our white sauce, I've got a large saucepan with the 50 grams of butter in there, which is now melted. We're on a low to medium heat. First thing to do is to add the onions. And we're just going to sweat these onions down for about 5 minutes, just until they start to soften nicely. Don't want to get any colour to these onions. So again, just a low to medium heat. So once we've got the onions softened, next thing to do is to add the garlic. And we're just going to cook that garlic through for a couple of minutes. So now's the time to add the flour. And it is really important that we cook this flour through for at least a couple of minutes to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan, so turn the heat right down if you have to. And it's the flour that combined with the butter called a roux which is going to thicken this sauce. So the next thing to do is to add our milk. I'm just going to bring this up to a gentle simmer and get rid of any lumps that are in there. So we've got our white sauce just coming up to a gentle simmer now. So I've been stirring this constantly just to make sure that the flour doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan and obviously burn. So the next thing to do is I want to add in our little pinch of nutmeg. And stir that in. Season and some salt and pepper. Okay, I then want to add about half of the mature cheddar cheese. And I'll reserve the other half for the topping. And just stir the cheese in until it's melted. Then goes our freshly grated parmesan, and again just stir that in until it melts. So after a couple of minutes, now is the time to assess the thickness of the sauce. So for me that's just about perfect, but if it's a little bit too thick for your liking, you can always add a little bit of extra milk. So next thing we're going to do with this, turn the heat out, leave it to cool for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'm going to place this through a blender just to get it a really nice smooth sauce, and then we'll be ready then to build our lasagna. So once the sauce has cooled slightly, you can either place this sauce through a food blender. I'm actually going to use a electric hand blender to blend the sauce, or you don't really have to blend it at all. I just like a really smooth white sauce with the lasagna, and all we're doing here is just breaking down the onion even further. So again, do this part of the recipe if you like, or you can just leave the sauce as is and use it in the lasagna. So before we start building the lasagna, just a little tip if you're using dried lasagna sheets. So as you can see from here, if you try and break or cut the lasagna sheet to shape, then the chances are it'll just fracture everywhere. But if you boil the kettle and have a Pyrex dish or a jug handy just to one side, and we need to trim the dried pasta sheet, just hold it in the water for about 10 or 15 seconds, and that softens the sheet enough to be able to cut it without it shattering everywhere. So if we get the scissors now, it just trims really easy. Okay, so it's time to build our lasagna. So I've got an oven-proof tray here which is 36 centimeters long by 25 centimeters wide and 5 centimeters deep. I've already placed the oven on, so we've got the oven preheating to 180 degrees centigrade. So the first layer that goes in our lasagna is the ragu sauce. I think the trick with any good lasagna is not to build any of the layers up too thickly. Make sure that the layers are quite uniform in the thickness throughout the lasagna. And we're basically just building up layers until we run out of ingredients, but make sure that the top layer of your lasagna is a layer of pasta sheet and then a layer of white sauce. So just make sure you've got enough white sauce left to top the lasagna off. So after the layer of ragu goes on the layer of pasta sheets. So another point about dried pasta sheets as well is that most brands actually make the pasta sheets so they can be split into length quite easy. So you'll be able to tell, I'm not sure if the camera can pick it up, but this is actually in 4 pieces, this particular sheet, so you can quite easily split them down. So again, if you're looking to buy the pasta sheets because you haven't got any in, then try and get the ones, if it's a dried pasta you're using, that have got these scores within the pasta sheet that makes them easy to break up. So the next layer is this delicious white sauce. So once the lasagna is built, next thing to do is just to add the cheese on top. Now I've got a little bit of white sauce left, which I'm going to freeze, and that kind of sauce is absolutely delicious if you're having a piece of fish or a jacket potato with the sauce over the top and then some grated cheese, again mature cheddar cheese. Freshly grated parmesan. Last thing to do is just a little bit of freshly ground black pepper over the top. So as I said, this is going into that preheated oven, 180 degrees centigrade, for about 45 minutes. So there you go, lasagna absolutely from scratch, really delicious, easy to make, and also relatively inexpensive for a family meal. Please subscribe to the channel, and as usual, if you've enjoyed this particular video, hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching.